Aliens. Have you ever wondered if we are the only living beings in the universe? Like everyone else, I also ask myself that question. Every day that passes, we discover that the universe is a little bigger and we are a little smaller. It always seemed ridiculous to me to think that we are the only living beings in the universe. What I never really expected was to have the opportunity to confirm my suspicions, to have the opportunity to see with my own eyes that we were not alone. Much less did I think I would have the opportunity to do it in a stream. This happened on my father's farm. It was an absolutely normal day. We didn't have crop circles. We didn't see flying saucers or any of those things that usually appear in the movies. It was nighttime, and when it all happened, I was in bed, sleeping. The night was totally normal. Shortly before we had eaten dinner, and my brother and I had gone to sleep, I must admit that I saw some lights and heard some noises coming from outside, but when I told my brother, he just laughed at me. You see, that same year I had started streaming. A streamer and good internet connection on a farm. Sounds modern, doesn't it? The point is that I was always prepared to film whatever weird stuff I might see here. I admit I was a little scared, so I looked out the window with my camera for a long time, but nothing. Maybe my brother was right. He lived on the farm for a longer period of time. When my parents separated, he stayed here and I moved in with my mother before they reconciled this year. My brother was already used to the noises and the farm atmosphere. Maybe I just had to get used to it. With this matter out of the way, I brushed my teeth and lay down on the bed. Slowly, my eyes began to close. I was really very sleepy. Before I knew it, I had fallen asleep, but this would not go on for long. Suddenly, I felt someone was pushing me with their arms. At first, I couldn't see who it was, as I was very sleepy. Once I woke up a little more, I noticed that this person was my father, who came to wake me up and tell me that there was an imposter on the farm. And to top it off, there was no light. My dad wasn't a very techie person and didn't like me wanting to be a streamer, but this time he had no choice but to let me grab my cell phone and activate the flashlight camera. What I didn't tell him is that he is streaming. Nothing ever happens on this farm, and I wasn't going to let this chance just come to nothing. We went downstairs with my father and brother to see who the invader was. My mother, on the other hand, stayed with my younger brother in his room. As we descended the stairs, the intruder soon revealed his position. From outside, we could hear some very strange noises, as if one or two people were clumsily going through the garbage. At that moment, we thought that maybe it was a homeless man. But how did he get in? My dad told my brother to go lock the back door while we checked, to which he agreed. With my dad holding a shotgun, we went outside and started checking. Trash cans and other tools were on the floor. Someone had thrown them out, but to our surprise, nothing had been stolen. At that moment, I got caught up in the excitement of recording a real robbery. I was still a small streamer and had no views, but that was really the least of it, since the streams stay on the platform for 60 days, and I could even make YouTube content out of it. Thinking more about all the possibilities than what was really going on, my dad saw me talking to the camera and realized what was going on. Angry, he told me to turn off the stream, that being here was dangerous. I told him I did, but he was actually still filming. At the time, I thought I had tricked him. But now that I'm a few years older, I realize that I didn't really trick him, and he suspected it. At the time, I know my father realized that I was still a 17-year-old teenager. I was not prepared for that situation. So, the one who cheated on me was him, telling me that the best thing I could do was to lock myself in the house with my brother. He told me it was to take care of my mother, but now I realize that he sent me so that my brother would take care of me. I went back to the house, but my brother was not in the kitchen. I heard some noises in the dining room, so I assumed it was him. I ran over calling out to him, filming everything I could, living this horrible situation as a big game. And that's when I saw him. A huge silhouette of almost 2.5 meters was standing in front of me, staring at me. It was pitch black, so I couldn't see his face or his body, but this was definitely real. I tried to film it for a few seconds, but from the unbearable terror I felt, I dropped my cell phone and ran into the kitchen to escape. But the back door was locked. If my brother didn't escape through there, where was he? I got under the table and let the tablecloth cover me. A few seconds later, I heard someone walking in the kitchen. This being walked slowly and patiently, stopping every so often. Whatever was there was looking for me. In the middle of this, I thought that the light had returned, because suddenly a strong glow invaded the whole kitchen. But that light was different from the one in the room. It was more intense, and it was more focused on where the noises were. From one second to the next, I began to feel very dizzy. I felt like vomiting, and I covered my mouth to avoid it. I started to shake, and my vision became blurry. In the middle of the confusion, things got even worse. A long, horrible hand was reaching under the table, looking for me. The hand was gray and scrawny. The fingers were huge and nailless. They were reaching farther and farther out, just millimeters away from touching me. I felt dizzier and dizzier. The hands stretched more and more until they reached my foot. Whatever had grabbed me began to pull me in its direction very slowly. It was very strange. This being was not exerting any force at all. It was simply dragging me like a doll. I could do absolutely nothing to stop it. I was so weak that I could only watch how that hand was dragging me. Once he finished pulling me from under the table, I tried to look him straight in the face, but it was impossible. Everything was so blurry, and the lights were so bright that whatever it was had become impossible to make out. My eyes began to close when suddenly I heard a scream behind me. It was my father. When he came in, he saw my cell phone on the floor and, in a panic, started looking all over for me. Unable to hold on a second longer, my eyes finished closing as I watched the lights that illuminated the room begin to fade, and that strange creature whose face I couldn't quite make out slowly began to leave. When I woke up, I was in bed. Everyone was acting normal. I asked my father what had happened, and he looked complicit with my older brother and mother. They explained how a homeless man came into the house, and my father threw him out. I pretended I didn't see what I saw and accepted his story. I could see my family's eyes of fear as they told it. I knew it was a lie. I knew that day we had an encounter with beings that did not belong to this world, but I understood that they did not want to scare me. The only problem for them is that I didn't need to believe them. Since I was streaming all night long, I got my cell phone back once. I went into my previous streams and I could see everything that happened. At the time, my cell phone was pretty bad, so the footage was of very poor quality. My whole family flatly denied what was clearly a being from another planet invading my home. On the internet, on the other hand, they did recognize that it was a very strange footage, but no one really believed me. Nowadays, there are so many videos of strange things that this just passed as another fake evidence of the paranormal. I was back to zero, and that was the day I ended my career as a streamer, as I felt there was no point in achieving fame that way. After that, we never had any more intruders in this house. However, sometimes I hear strange noises outside, as if someone is walking around the house, watching it. Whenever this happens, I decide to just close my eyes and wait for the sun to come up. Streamer Uber driver. For as long as I can remember, I have seen many horror videos where the most terrifying Uber drivers stalk looking for victims to kill. Everyone has a story with an Uber, but you know what? I have more stories than you do. You see, I'm not the passenger, I'm the Uber driver. And I'm not just a Uber driver, I am a streamer Uber driver. You may ask, what is an Uber driver streamer? You see, it's pretty simple. Have you ever seen the Cab Confession show? Well, this is something similar. While I'm doing my Uber rides, I'm also streaming through my camera installed next to the overhead mirror. It may be morally wrong, since I don't tell all my passengers about this, but what can I tell them? Uber is not my priority, and I needed something to boost my career as a streamer. Besides, let's be honest, the one in the most danger and the one with the best horror stories to tell is the driver, not the passenger. I understand that it may seem a little scary to get into a stranger's car, but Uber notifies passengers of all my information and the number of rides I've taken. On the other hand, imagine how scary it is to have not just one stranger, but dozens of strangers getting into your car every day. And you know what is worse than that? When that stranger inside the car is not a passenger, or even a human. This happened on a Sunday night. I had finished making all the trips for the night and was ready to go home. So I turned off the app before finishing the last trip. I thought about ending the stream as well, but I preferred to leave it on. I couldn't see the comments, but I felt they kept me company, and besides, if someone tried to rob me, their face would be filmed too. When I dropped the girl off at her house, I took the Avenue Road to get home quickly. The avenue used to be the fastest way, but there was always a lot of traffic. Luckily, at this time of the morning, it was completely empty. I continued driving home. I may have become confident in the fact that the avenue was empty, so calmness took over my body, and I started to fall asleep. Working at this time is usually pretty good if you are an Uber driver. Sundays are usually very busy as many people visit their families and come back at night. I was trying hard not to fall asleep, until suddenly, something forced me to wake up. A little girl was in the middle of the avenue. I reacted as fast as I could to swerve to avoid her, but I couldn't do it in time. I was sure I had hit her, but something very strange was happening. I didn't feel the impact of the body in the car. I didn't hear the girl or her body falling on the road either. Could it be that she had dodged me in time? But that was impossible. No one could move that fast. I braked the car and got out as fast as I could to inspect if the girl was hurt. But nothing. The avenue was totally empty. I looked under the car and found no one either. There was no girl, no person, nothing. It was as if the girl had never been here. Once inside the car, and somewhat in shock, I spoke to my audience and told them that something very strange had just happened. I told them about the situation I had just experienced. I even took out the camera and showed them the road. I took out my cell phone for a moment to read the comments, and everyone was as confused as I was. Everyone heard the crash. Everyone was convinced that I had hit someone, but no one expected that by pointing the cell phone camera everywhere, no one would be found. I started the car again and began to drive. A few meters later, I came to a red light. There would be nothing wrong with driving. The avenue was empty, but I wanted to respect the rules. I had already had too big a scare with the little girl. Suddenly, I felt that something was wrong, like a cold going through my spine. I felt I had to look in the rearview mirror, but if I did, I would surely regret it. Against my better judgment, I decided to appeal to logic and look in the driver's door mirror. What was the worst that could happen? Maybe I would run into the girl on the road. I thought that would be strange for sure, but at least I would know that she was alive and maybe lost. I gathered all my courage and looked in the rearview mirror, but not to my surprise, there was no one there. Just an empty avenue. I took a deep breath, now much calmer, while I saw how the traffic light was still red. The strange thing is that I still felt that strange feeling of terror in my back. At that moment, the corner of my eye drifted almost reflexively to the mirror in the center of the car. And when I saw what was in the passenger seat, I gave a dry scream. In the passenger seat, which had not opened and all the windows were closed, I saw the girl from the road. She was in a schoolgirl uniform. Her hair was very long and covered half of her face. I could only see one of her two eyes, but that was enough to freeze me with fear in a way nothing else ever had. Her gaze was piercing, cold, and terrifying. She wasn't looking at me angrily, but her eye was as wide open as physically possible. I turned around quickly, but the same thing I had seen in the mirror, I could not see with my eyes. Behind me, there was no one. I looked in the rearview mirror again, and the girl was still there, staring at me in the same position. This didn't make any sense at all. I grabbed the cell phone again and started reading the comments. Everyone was very scared, but for me, despite some comments saying they were faking it, everyone was shocked at how real my reaction was. But at the same time, everyone was saying the same thing. There was no one behind me. I turned around again in confusion. The girl was behind me. She was slowly coming towards me. I tried to open my car door to escape, but suddenly it was locked. I had never locked it before. It didn't make any sense. I tried to roll down the car windows, but they were locked. I grabbed my car keys and unlocked the door as fast as I could. As I did so, I looked back. The girl was gone, but I wasn't going to stay in that car for one more second. As soon as I got out, I started running home. I ran and ran as fast as I could. Minutes passed, and I was still running. My house was almost 5 kilometers away from where I was, but I ran all of them without considering sitting down to rest even for a second. I got into my house and went straight to bed. With all the lights on and the TV on, I started crying. As time went by, some mystery YouTube channels dedicated videos to me, but it was always the same. Nobody believed in them. Everyone was looking for the video trick or the editing I might have done. As it was a live stream, many believed me, but still, they forgot as soon as the next paranormal case came up. People may have forgotten about it or my stream, but for me, the nightmare was far from over. From that day on, nothing was the same. For the first few weeks, nothing happened. I even allowed myself to try to forget what had happened, but I couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. I sent a tow truck to pick up my car, which I sold for a ridiculously low price in a very short time, but I'm afraid it wasn't the car that was the problem. Every night I wake up at the same time. The time I almost ran over that little girl. When I do, I feel like I'm not alone in the house. It's as if someone or something is watching me in the dark. Even when I leave the lights on, when I wake up, they are off. I tried sleeping in a friend's house or with someone at my house, but nothing changed. I feel that one of these days, whatever is chasing me will catch me, and I can do absolutely nothing to avoid it. Cementary. Hello, I'm a streamer who is dedicated to showcasing serial killers and government conspiracies. Obviously, I won't tell you the name of my channel because I'm already a pretty big streamer and I don't need to bring that kind of attention among my followers. To tell you the truth, I'm a little uncomfortable telling you the story I'm about to tell you since I'm not very proud of it, but I need to do it so you don't make the same mistakes I made when I was younger. Mistakes of being afraid of ghosts or spirits when there is something much more dangerous out there. At the time it all happened, I was only 19 years old. They were my first videos as an urban explorer, but I knew I had support from my friends and other urban horror explorers with much more established audience. They were the ones who recommended me to become a streamer, and as I was a very charismatic guy, they thought I would surely do well. But I'd have to make really good content from the beginning, and they would help me do that. That same Saturday, we planned to do an urban exploration in a cemetery. Even though I had a caretaker, the cemetery was really huge, and my friends were convinced that we could make good content out of it. We all prepared to go to the cemetery that night. During that time, all my friends had a huge amount of subscribers by that time. That night, they were all going to be streaming, which would also work in my favor, since they were going to name me in the video, asking their subscribers to follow me. That was going to be my big night. There was no way I imagined it was going to turn into my worst nightmare. That night, we all got together at Greg's house for pizza. He had the biggest channel of all, and he was the one who made the equipment to start the exploration. I hadn't known Greg for over 6 months, but during that time, we became pretty close. Once the time was right, we all went to the cemetery. The place was large, and we knew that the guard spent most of his time at the main gate. The rest of the cemetery was covered by walls and big wires, but the cemetery was very old and neglected, so many of these wires were broken. We started passing our cameras and tape recorders through the holes. and then went in ourselves. We went in one by one, until all 4 of us were through. It was only a few minutes after we started entering the cemetery, and just like that, we were inside. Honestly, I didn't know much about the cemetery, and I always fantasized about exploring it at night. I thought it was going to be fun since we were going to be among friends, and that would take the tension out of the whole situation of being in the cemetery, but the opposite happened. We were all very scared. There was a very strange aura, as if something was wrong, as if we were disturbing something we had no business disturbing. We kept walking through the cemetery, shining the light on the terrifying graves. The cemetery looked destroyed, and the mausoleums were broken, revealing sarcophagi and wilted flowers. My friends kept walking, ignoring most of the graves. They seemed determined, like they knew where they were going. Greg's attitude was the one that caught my attention the most. He looked scared, but he was still determined and went ahead of everything. Suddenly, they all stopped in a huge mausoleum. As soon as we arrived, Greg told me that this was my rite of passage into the world of streamers. This mausoleum was witness to many paranormal acts. Here, they always see a girl playing at night, and they could never capture video evidence, and tonight, I was going to do it. I had many doubts and even considered not going, but something was holding me back. They all told me that they trusted me, that they knew I could do it, and that it was my responsibility as a new member of the group. I hated to admit it, but they were right. They trusted me to be part of the team. They were going to recommend me as a streamer and make me grow. The least I could do was to encourage me to be like them. I slowly approached the mausoleum. I felt that something I shouldn't play with was in front of me, but I didn't care. I just turned off my brain and kept walking, terrified, but with a courage I had never had before. I pointed the camera inside the mausoleum, and there was nothing. When I turned around, I received no answer, but everyone was looking at me with a look of absolute panic on their faces. When I turned around again, there was a strange figure looking at me. It was a girl, but she was dressed as a bride. Her face was white and terrifying. Her body was full of blood. I wanted to run, but I was paralyzed. Without warning and aware that I couldn't move, she ran towards me. All I could do was close my eyes. I was paralyzed, full of fear, waiting for whatever I had to wait for. Suddenly, there was silence. The silence went on for a few seconds, until I heard something else. Was it laughter? When I opened my eyes, all my friends were laughing loudly. The girl in front of me didn't look so threatening anymore. She was laughing too. She wasn't a ghost, a zombie, or a demon. She was Greg's girlfriend. The cameraman was also laughing loudly while he kept filming. At that moment, I understood everything that was going on. All this time, they were using me. They weren't trying to boost my career as a streamer. They just wanted to make fun of me. They wanted to make content out of my fear. When I angrily told them, they just kept laughing and told me not to take it the wrong way, cutting off their streams in the process. Once they did, Greg told me that only some can make it to the top. Others are just there to help them. His answer made me furious. I walked towards him with every intention of punching him, but something made me stop. There was a shadow behind him. While everyone was still taunting me, an adult approached Greg from behind, attacking him with a huge machete. We all ran, but the man threw the machete at us, hitting me in the leg. All my friends stood there watching me, nervous. I know they could have reached me. I know they could have helped me, but they didn't even try. They all ran away in desperation, escaping from the cemetery. A few seconds later, the man was next to me, reclaiming his machete that was stuck in my leg. The wound was not serious, but it left me totally immobilized. I tried to crawl before the eyes of this terrifying man, but without mercy, he began to step on my head and move it from side to side as if I were a cockroach. Full of anger, the man told us that this is what we earned for mocking the dead. He told us that his wife is buried nearby, and that he will not allow anyone to disrespect her or the rest of the corpses. Full of fury, the man raised his machete, ready to bury it in my skull. When the least expected help arrived, the security guard lunged at him to save me, and the two men began to fight. Although he was doing his best to save me, it was easy to see that the security guard was losing the fight. The psychopath was able to take him down easily and kneeling on top of him. He beat him brutally. I gathered all my strength to jump towards the psycho, and with the last of my energy, I bit his ankle as hard as I could. In the face of this distraction, the guard hit him with a stone, and the psychopath vanished on the ground. It was all over. The police arrived shortly thereafter and were horrified by the crime scene. The man was arrested for manslaughter, and to this day, he is still not out of prison, nor do I believe he will be. As for me, I never heard from my so-called friends again. They blocked me from all social networks and never spoke to me again. On the other hand, I did make one friend. The security guard at the cemetery saved my life, and from time to time, I would visit him until I moved. On those visits, he told me all about the psychopath. Apparently, I had seen him several days before, sneaking into the cemetery at night with his huge machete, looking for unsuspecting victims to attack. His true identity was never known. Shortly after, he confessed that his wife was not buried there. He didn't even have a wife. The only thing that became clear to me is that you don't know who you might meet or what things he will do to you. That day, I stopped being afraid of the dead. You know, the living scares me more.